Hi, friends, and welcome to another RobCast. And this one, I am so excited for you to hear this interview. I'm so excited I'm recording an intro to this interview, just so I can talk about the interview before you actually hear the interview. A couple things real quick. New book comes out March 8th. My new book is called How to Be Here, and you'll be able to get it anywhere. You can get it. You can pre-order it right now, and then I'm going to go on tour for the book, and we're going to go all over the country and do all-day Saturday events. So I'm going to do Friday night signings in bookstores, and then the next day there'll be an all-day event. You can get tickets to that at robbell.com. We're renting art galleries and dance halls and event spaces, and because I'd like to spend the whole day with you. And we'll start with some of the ideas in the book, and then we will go all over the place. And I'm just so excited because so many of you are like, you should come do one of those 1 or 2 days in my city. So that's what we're trying to do. And the first leg will run March through the end of June, and then we'll go from there. So all that is happening. You can get the book now and pre-order it, all that. Memorial Day, May 30th, my beloved friend Elizabeth Gilbert and I, Elizabeth Gilbert of Eat, Pray, Love, Big Magic, Signature of All Things, she and I are going to do an event at Wanderlust Hollywood, which is a big yoga studio here in Hollywood. And we're going to sit side by side on stools, and we're going to go all day. We're going to talk about fear, joy, creativity, finding your voice. So it's one day with Rob Bell with special guest Liz Gilbert, and you can get your tickets at robbell.com. And then if you happen to be in the Los Angeles area at the end of March, Pete Holmes and I, renowned comic Pete Holmes and I, will be doing another of our two-man shows at Largo on Tuesday the 29th, and you can get tickets at largo-la.com. So those are some things that are coming up, but right now, I am going to play this interview for you that I got to do. You know, when you think of like the ancient spiritual tradition, or the wisdom tradition, you picture the guru, the yogi, the master teacher, the sage, the saint. You picture this person who they're so grounded, they're so in the flow, they are so tuned in, whatever language you want to use. They walk with God. You know, different traditions have different language for it, but I'm sure you've had experiences where you were with somebody and you literally just want to sit at their feet and soak in their presence. And a number of years ago, I read this book called The Echo of the Soul by this Scottish mystic, teacher, minister, guru. The book was so... like, who wrote this? His name was John Phillip Newell. And so he'd written this book, The Echo of the Soul. He's written a number of books, including a new book called The Rebirthing of God. How's that for a title? But I got to meet him a little while ago, and it was exactly like I actually thought it would be. I just found myself, asking question after question after question, feeling like I was in the presence of a rare human being. And then the other day, he came over to my house, and I got to record what would have been exactly the conversation we probably would have had if we would have gone out to eat. But I thought I need to record this because I have to tell my podcast friends about this. So, and by the way, do you ever have experiences where you're like, how did we get here where I could have John Phillip Newell in my house and we could have this conversation and I could be learning and be so blessed by another human being. And I think you'll pick that up pretty quickly in this interview that this is somebody... yeah, like this is like the village elder, you know what I mean? The person that you lean on, that you go to, that you listen, like a North Star. It just fills me with such gratitude. It's such a humbling thing that I get to have a conversation with somebody like that. I get to record it, and then I get to share it with you. So I don't normally record an intro to an interview, but this one is just, so many of them are so incredible for me. But this one, I felt like I just need to say, John Phillip Newell in the back house on the RobCast. Good Lord, how great is this? So here you go. Hello, friends, and welcome to another RobCast. And today I have with me the great John Phillip Newell. Welcome, John Phillip Newell.
Thank you, Rob. Good to
All
be with
the
you.
way from Scotland. I first heard about you when somebody gave me this book of yours, Echo of the Soul, which I am holding in my hand now. And I was like, who is this who has written this extraordinary book? So I would love to dive into the book. But first, you grew up in Canada?
Born in Canada, and my father was from Ireland, and my mother is of Scottish descent. So we were connected to family in Ireland and Scotland, but Canada was my place of primary and secondary school education. And then I went to Scotland to study theology.
Did it feel like going home?
Yeah, in many ways it did. I think it was important for me as a young man, also with a father who was very well known in conservative evangelical circles in Canada. I think it was important for me to have an Atlantic distance so that I could explore and study theology in a way that was quite free from family inheritance. Not that he was ever heavy-handed in terms of how I pursued my knowing and my study, but it was important to have that bit of distance, I think.
And what was your area of study? Like when I read a book like Echo of the Soul, I'm like, where is this? Where have they been that they could write this? Do you know what I mean? Do you ever do that? You read something and you're like, what has worked or influenced this person to have shaped this kind of voice?
Yeah. For me, the great sense of homecoming while I was studying theology was discovering this stream of spirituality within our Christian inheritance that we now refer to as Celtic spirituality. And that's a modern term, of course, but we use it to refer to a distinct stream of spirituality that came to birth in the 2nd century and following in the Celtic territory of ancient Gaul and then in Ireland and Scotland. And this was a stream of spirituality that was free from what later developed as a more imperial form of Christianity. Once Christianity got in bed with empire, there was a sense that some of the truths of the Christian inheritance were considered inconvenient to empire.
Like what? I totally understand. Like what?
A couple of sort of primary characteristics. One was this belief that what is deepest in every human being is the sacred light of God, or the image of God, or the likeness of God. That always worries empire, because if the masses are where the light of God is, if the well of wisdom is seen as deep within the people, then empire can't so easily just tell the people what to believe or tell the people what to do. And we see this conflict playing itself out at critical points of conflict between the imperial mission of the church from the 4th century onwards and the Celtic Christian mission. So the wisdom piece, where is wisdom to be found, was one of those areas of conflict. Another area of conflict was the Celtic tradition talking about the sacredness of the earth. So again, we can't do whatever we want to the earth. The Celtic mission was encouraging us into a reverencing of how we handle the creatures and how we handle the body and matter of the earth. And all of these threads are very interconnected, of course, but one of the other big pieces was the way in which the Celtic tradition reverenced the sacredness of the feminine. So we find patterns of women in leadership. St. Bridget, for instance, the great sort of 5th century Irish saint, was the head of a double monastery of men and women, and she had bishops sort of under under her authority. And when Christianity became the imperial religion of Rome, there was a desire to subordinate the feminine, and they felt quite threatened by the practice that was happening out at the edge of the earth, as Ireland and Scotland was considered.
It's fascinating. These are all very, very modern issues.
Yes.
The number of people who are like, where did it all go wrong? Why has there been such a dominant male voice? Why has there been such an abuse of the earth? And second century, you see the roots of some of these problems.
Yes. And that's what's been very exciting for me. I mean, I was trained as a historical theologian. I was fascinated in the history of the unfolding of certain movements and streams. But my real interest is the heart of this moment in time. And so what I find myself doing is drawing from aspects of our inheritance and saying, here's some lost treasure for us today. And that's really what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to bring some of this ancient perspective to the well-being not only of the Christian household, but asking how we can, as a Christian household, be part of healing work and peacemaking work and care for the earth work in our world.
It's so, I assume it just makes your head spin. The respect for women and the sacred feminine, the acknowledgement of the goodness of people, the light, the divine spark, the care for the earth are considered now, I mean, you must laugh, very progressive, of the moment, ahead of the curve truths that are actually very, very old.
Yes. I love that saying, that phrase that we find used by the Jewish mystics sometimes when they speak of new ancient words, new ancient wisdom. It's this recognition that some of these wisdoms are deep within our inheritance, but often they've been smothered over or pushed out to the edge. And what we can be part of is a rising again of ancient wisdom, speaking ancient wisdom in new and radical ways for today.
So you became a priest, minister, pastor. Where did all this lead you?
I studied theology primarily thinking that what I wanted to do was work in and research through and delve more into the academic side of theology. And during that time, my PhD work was on a Scottish heretic from the 19th century who was unanimously deposed from the Church of Scotland for teaching that everything is essentially sacred. I mean, that's dangerous.
Everything is spiritual. Whoa.
And he was very important to me. At the end of my 3 years of delving into this man, Alexander Scott, I was dreaming about him, and I was having conversations in my dream life.
What years did he live?
He lived between 1805 and 1861, I think it was.
And his premise was everything is sacred. Everything
is essentially sacred. And that was seen as pushing the boundaries because the Scottish Christianity, especially at that stage, was in a very Calvinistic mode.
And for those who would be brand new to this discussion, which I think, a Calvinistic would have influenced lots of what people would see in the Western world. How would you explain that to somebody who hasn't heard that?
Well, very central in the Calvinistic system is the doctrine of original sin. So that in a sense is the starting point. It wants to say that at the heart of every human being is what is opposed to God, whereas the Celtic stream is wanting to say that what is deepest or what is most essential in every human being is of God. I
love that. That's well said.
So the doctrine of original sin I describe as our obsessive-compulsive disorder. I mean, we can hardly get through a liturgy, we can hardly get through a hymn
Right.
without going on about what shitbags we are. And if every time I entered the presence of my wife, I felt I had to go on about how horrible I was. I mean, she might like it once,
Yeah.
but if I did it every time I entered into her presence, it would be a pretty sick relationship. And I think that that's part of what we've been doing through this obsession with the doctrine of original sin. I mean, having said that, this is not to say that the Celtic Christian tradition treats falseness lightly, and it's not naive about our capacity for the most horrendous faithlessness and falseness towards one another.
Correct.
And in fact, it's quite a rigorously penitential tradition. But it sees that what is deepest in us is of God. So any repentance work is about returning to what is deepest in us. It's not about becoming something, it's striving to become something other than ourselves.
Right. There is your true self that reflects the divine image. And you, perhaps, like all of us, have done some things to disrupt or destroy the shalom. But that your true self is good. That, it's so fascinating to me how your work in historical theology and Alexander Scott, is that correct?
Yeah.
How all of these, and Celtic spirituality is all right now what everybody's talking about. It's just, so then you became a minister? So
Yes, so I became a minister of the Church of Scotland, which is the national church in Scotland, and I never ended up in a straightforward Church of Scotland parish situation. My first job after the PhD was to do university chaplaincy work for 6 years, and I loved that. I loved that combination of doing a bit of teaching in the university context, but giving most of my energy to the developing of a community that rooted its life in the practice of prayer and meditation, and saw our engagement with social issues or justice issues as coming out of a spirituality of presence.
it's interesting. I love Richard Rohr's organization, the Center for Action and Contemplation. It's interesting to me how many of the meditative and contemplative communities, often that leads to a very vibrant activism.
Yes, I think that's right. I mean, speaking personally, I would say that very early on in my university life and formation, I had a very keen sense of issues around justice making and peacemaking, and found myself enormously attracted to non-violence as a very significant energy for real change and transformation in the world. But I also saw that there's a capacity for burning out in social activism when it is not rooted in a contemplative practice, and I think that's what someone like Richard Rohr, but also the great Thomas Merton, American prophet in many ways for peacemaking, he saw just how important it is to root our sense of action in a sustainable practice of contemplative prayer.
It's so interesting to me. If the tradition starts with be still, you're loved, there's nothing to prove,
Yeah.
you are a child of the divine, everything's all right with the universe, even if it isn't.
Yes.
That if the tradition begins with grace upon grace upon grace, it grounds people in something that creates this wellspring within the heart that then actually people do come out of that with tremendous energies to be brave and courageous and nonviolent.
Yeah, it's. I think Thomas Merton maybe articulates it more succinctly than any great teacher in the modern Christian household, because he's very perceptive of what our ego does, and he's not putting down the ego. The ego is our gift, our faculty of knowing. It's our faculty of consciousness and of choosing. But he's very perceptive to the way in which the ego is forever wanting to claim center ground. And he sees just how puny the ego strength is at the end of the day, and how much the ego strength is just not up to the big challenges in our world today. And I would say that is true not just at the individual level, but also at the national level. I mean, think of the enormous ego of our nations, of the American Empire, of the British Empire, massive egos that end up thinking that the rest of the world is there to, in fact, serve our, ego center. Yes. Or think of the enormous ego of the human species, which has pretended that the rest of creation, the rest of the universe exists for our well-being.
Yes, to serve us.
So whether it's the individual, pretending that the individual ego is the center, or the national ego, or the species ego. And what Merton sees very clearly, and he so beautifully articulates it, is this realization that if we're serious about the work of transformation in our world, then we have within us resources, strengths, wisdom, creativity that is not just the domain of the ego. In fact, the only way to access this great wellspring of creativity and wisdom and passion is by doing the work, both individually but in community, of dying to the way in which the ego claims center ground. I was thinking just 2 days ago, I was remembering Thomas Merton's epiphany moment. He was already considered a great teacher in 1958. Already his material had been read by millions of people. And he's in Louisville, Kentucky, meeting with his publisher. And on the way home, he's walking through the streets of Louisville. He comes to the corner of 4th and Walnut Street. And suddenly he is aware that everyone around him is shining, he says. Everyone's just sort of shining like the sun. And he is aware that although he doesn't know any of these people, he realizes that he loves them, that their essence is of God. And he then goes on to say, if we were to see this way all the time, there would be no more war, there would be no more hatred, there would be no more cruelty, there would be no more greed. And then he finishes his reflection by saying, I suppose the only problem with this way of seeing, he said, is that we might want to fall down and worship one another. And he concludes it's worth taking that risk, because the risk of adoring one another is much greater, much better than the risk of ignoring one another, or harming one another, or exploiting one another, or hating one another.
So good. So good. Okay, so let's talk about this book. This book, Echo of the Soul, came out, the subtitle is The Sacredness of the Human Body. How long ago did this come out?
I think that was in the late 90s, or maybe it was around 2000.
And was this book in you for years?
Yes, it was, and we've been talking a bit about the Celtic stream of spirituality and that part of my inheritance. I became fascinated by some of the resonances between Celtic spirituality and the mystic Jewish stream. And I noted that both these traditions were showing great reverence for the body of the earth, but also for the human body. I so love the sort of robust sense of the goodness of the earth and
Yes.
the goodness of the human body that we get in the Jewish stream of inheritance, and we find some of that also in the Celtic world. I was doing an interfaith dialogue last year in Richmond, Virginia, with a rabbi and a Muslim imam, and I was on the panel as the Christian teacher. And at one stage in the evening, someone asked from the floor, they said, would you talk about the problem of original sin? And I mean, this is a Christian problem. This is not a Jewish problem or a Muslim. That's not where they start. They start with the essential sacredness of the newborn child. And but the rabbi was the first to respond, and he said, "Original sin." He said, "That to most Jews would mean that was a really original sin. That was
No one has done that before.
That was a really creative sin."
Have you seen Eddie Izzard, the British comedian, who does a whole thing on that?
No,
you poked out your eye with a badger. Oh, that's original. He has a whole thing on things no one has done before. Well done. Very original.
Yeah, that's right. So the Jewish, it has a wonderfully robust and healthy sense of the senses and of our physicalness and of the essential sacredness of our sexual energies. And I mean, it's been tragic, the undermining of belief in the sacredness of the human body, and so much doubt associated with our sexual energy as well. And that in part is what has wreaked havoc in not only in our broader culture at times, but also in our religious inheritance. This somehow denying of the sacredness of our sexual energies, so I noticed the sort of convergence of Jewish wisdom about the body and Celtic wisdom about the body. And Echo of the Soul is really an attempt to allow these two traditions to feed one another and to flourish together. So I take this Jewish understanding of that's very similar to the Eastern notion of chakras, of special energy centers in the body, but the Jewish tradition calls it sephirot or sapphires or shinings of God that can be found within the human body, so that there are particular shinings like the center of the forehead, which is the sort of shining of wisdom, or the arms, which are seen as shining of strength on the one hand, linked with love on the other, and how we so need to hold strength and love together so that the shadow side of strength doesn't dominate, and the heart as the sort of shining of beauty in us, and the genitals as the shining of creativity and our God-given capacity to bring into being what has never been before. So I allow the Jewish understanding of shinings in the body to be the sort of framework through which I visit every part of our physicalness and see and reflect on how our spiritual energies and our physical energies are so interwoven.
And like in the introduction, I knew this book was special when there's more packed. I underlined more of the introduction than I do most whole books. But you have this line in Jewish belief: the body is the soul in its outward form. Because I think for many people, especially in the Western world, you have this physical body and then all the really magical, important stuff that's sort of jammed in it.
Yes.
And in there, the body and the soul are... can you say more about that? The body is the soul in its outward form.
It's one of the reasons I chose the title Echo of the Soul, and this is something that one of the Celtic teachers said about the body being an echo of the soul, and it's very similar to what the Jewish tradition is saying when it says the body is the soul in its outward form. So the To say that the body is the soul in its outward form, or to say that the body is an echo of the soul, is to say, yes, the body is passing. It comes and it will go and it will return to the earth. So let's not live in a way that pretends that this is not an echo. It's going. But let's live in a way that we really pay attention to what we find in the body, because it is an expression of the soul. And one of the other images that comes across in the Celtic world is that the soul is not in the body is in the soul. So
Yes.
this sense that the shining around the human body, the shining in your eyes, is a shining that is not just physical. It is held within this much deeper energy. And this is what we're being invited to pay attention to. And I think if we see this shining in one another's eyes, or if we see this shining in one another's body, and if we see it in one another's sexuality, then we're being called to reverence it, not to abuse it, not to use it, but to reverence it.
You say that the Garden of Eden is our place of deepest identity. It is a dimension within us from which we have been divorced.
Yes.
Which I love. You take this Genesis poem and you read it as a telling of where we are. Our place of profoundest identity has not been destroyed. Rather, we have become fugitives from it.
Yes.
It's so good.
And
maybe we should just read passages and just pause.
I was doing something a couple of months ago with a group of organized by a group of Dominican sisters.
Love them Dominicans.
Yeah. And one of the sisters was telling me that she's had a sort of spiritual reading group, and the book that they've been on for a while is my most recent book, The Rebirthing of God, Christianity, Struggle for New Beginnings. And she says, what we do every week when we get together, and this is just about 25 people, they get together and the leader of the group begins to meditatively read, slowly, meaningfully read, and after a paragraph, we'll stop, and sometimes they just go into silence for a while. But it's also an opportunity for people to say, these words release this awareness in me or that awareness. And so sometimes there's conversation. And she said, you know how long we've been sort of using this book of yours? We've been studying for over 6 months, and we've only got past chapter 3.
Yes, that was exactly my experience of this book.
So there is something to be said for reading really slowly. I mean, I can't read anything but slowly. I'm a really slow reader. I'm always amazed at these people that can consume a book a day or something. But I think there's a lot to be said for slowing down, but also to do it together, to do it with other people.
Yes.
And I think we're living in a time of immense loneliness or exile for many of our brothers and sisters who were born into the Christian household and who don't on a Sunday find themselves in community, praying, studying, reflecting with others. Because often the fare that is being dished up is not feeding their souls or is not speaking profoundly into this moment in time.
I love your description of why lots of people don't go to church. The fare that is being dished up. You say it with such elegance.
But it's a sad time. It's a time of exile for many of us, and many of us are really hungry for a community with whom to reflect and pray and celebrate.
Absolutely. That's one of the things that most drives me in my work is simply, and even doing this broadcast, is to let people know they're not alone.
Yeah.
That the stirrings within them lots of us have, and they're actually not new.
Yes.
You can find in this deep, rich, wide stream going back literally, like you're saying, 2,000 years and past that. You say here redemption is about being reconnected to our true self.
Mm.
How do you talk? Because I'm so interested when I go around and talk and people ask questions, how many people ask a question, but they know the answer to it?
Yeah.
There's an inner wisdom, I call it the Christ wisdom, is in
Yes.
them. They actually know the answer. They just need somebody
Yeah.
to nod and say, yeah.
Yeah.
And I always think of that in terms of the true self. Like, you have a true self that knows the next step here.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you talk about the true self and what it is and how it works and how we've become disconnected from it? And
Mm. A number of years ago, I was giving a talk in Lynchburg, Virginia, at a church in Lynchburg, Virginia. Not,
I was going to say,
not that church in Lynchburg.
that's like the capital of, that's the capital of certainty.
That's right. And I mean, in the public talk that I was giving, I was touching on this theme of being made in the image of God, and speaking about the newborn child as celebrated in the Celtic tradition. It was said, when we look into the face of a newborn child, we're looking into the face of God, freshly born among us.
Mm.
And I mean, I need to share with you, just over a week ago, my first grandchild was born.
Oh,
Oh,
congratulations.
thank you. I mean, and you know, I got to hold her just hours after she was born, and she looked with such calmness into my eyes, and I felt that it was God looking into my eyes. It was from this place of eternity that she was looking into me. Beautiful gift, and this is one of the things that we see in the Celtic tradition. It celebrates the newborn child as gift from God, sacred gift, and as a sort of fresh embodiment of God among us. And I was sort of exploring some of these themes, and at the end of the talk, a woman in her 80s came very purposefully up the central aisle, and she was walking with such sort of formidable sort of determination, and I noticed she had a copy of my book, Listening for the Heartbeat of God, in her hand. And the naughty boy in me thought, she's going to hit me over the head with that book. I mean, she's coming up so certainly that, you know, she looks like she wants to disagree with me. But I was quite wrong. When she got up to the front, she opened the copy of the book and said, I want to show you what I wrote in this book of yours after I read it. And inside she had written, I knew it, I knew it, I knew it. And, you know, so often I wish I had asked her for that copy of the book, because I think that's what we do experience at these critical turning points in our lives. Often when ancient wisdom that has been lost or cut off within our tradition finds its way of resurrection, finds a new coming forth. And when we receive such glimpses of deep knowing, and that is about the sacredness of the newborn child, our deep response is, I knew that. But I haven't necessarily heard it, or the religious tradition that I've been reared in wasn't saying that, and that's one of the reasons why I have come to believe that the real role of a teacher, and I see my role as a wandering teacher, is to articulate what people already know at a deep level, so that the sounding of truths that I'm trying to serve or trying to be part of is to actually release these these epiphany moments, such as this dear old woman, I knew it, I knew it, I knew it. And I think that's the greatest thing that we can do for one another when we have a teaching charism or a teaching gift, to see we're not taking something that isn't in our listeners and trying to sort of deposit it
Exactly.
in them. Our role is to find these ways to articulate up into awareness what's already there.
Oh, so good. I love it when people say, I've been saying that for years. I've been thinking that for a decade.
Yeah.
Yes, good.
Yeah.
Good, good. And then I even got out a highlighter, which I never do. Spirituality page. Look at, we're still in the intro. We're still in the Roman numerals of this book. Spirituality does not consist, you write, of being told what to do. It consists of being reminded of who we are. Only when we know who we are will we be clear about what we should do. So good. I've actually thought about this book for people who this is the kind of book where I think get some friends, have a good meal, read, in this case, like 2 lines, and 4 hours later, go home and come back later. You talk about the crown of the head, which I found fascinating here, and the power of the image of the crown of a head, that what cannot be said about us is always greater than anything that can be said. Can you talk a bit about the crown of the head and this idea of what can be said about us is always greater than anything that can be said?
A great Jewish teacher that I've been diving back into recently is Martin Buber.
Love him.
Yeah.
Love him.
Yeah.
I know.
And the title of his most seminal work, I and Thou, it really is exploring this theme. And I was on an airplane a couple of months ago, flying into Atlanta, Georgia, and normally when I get on airplanes, I use it as a time of solitude, and I've mastered this technique of being able to say hello graciously to the person seated next to me, and that hello recognizes their presence, but also says to them, "This will be the last word that you receive from me until the end of the flight." And I mean, I'm not always proud of needing such solitude, but anyway, it's part of keeping the pace. But in October, I was on a flight, and I'm so glad I didn't stick by that practice of not engaging. But it wasn't really at my initiative. I was on in a seat, and seated next to me was a young woman that I thought was from India. It turned out she was from Nepal. But I had on my sheet, on my lap, some notes of a talk I was going to be giving that night based on Martin Buber's I and Thou. And shortly after takeoff, I had fallen asleep. And when I woke up, this young Hindu woman from Nepal next to me tapped me on the arm, and now she was going to address a man. So she had pulled the veil over her face, so all I could see were these beautiful brown eyes. And she said, "I have a question for you." And she said, "What does I am who I am mean?" She had seen this sort of quotation from that Exodus story of Moses asking the presence in the burning bush, "What is your name? Who should I tell my people I have encountered in the burning bush?" And the answer is, "I am who I am." So here I was given this opportunity to try to express simply this great mystery at the heart of our Jewish Christian inheritance, and that is God revealing himself or herself not through a name, in fact, refusing a name, but saying just, I am who I am. I shall be who I shall be. I have been who I have been. So this refusal to be defined by either definition or name. So I said to the young woman, you are a woman, and you are a daughter, and you are from Nepal, and you are a Hindu. And I said, all of these things you are probably proud to say about yourself. But I said, but you will always be more than this, and what you are essentially cannot be named. You're not just a gender, you're not just a nationality, you're not just a religion. You are of the one who refuses the name of definition. And she said, but who am I? My parents tell me what I am. They tell me to listen to the Hindu priest who tells me who I am. But who am I? So I pointed down at this other word on the paper in front of me, and that is the word thou. And I said, do you know what this word means? And her English wasn't good enough for her to immediately understand. And I said, thou is the word that I would use if I was speaking right into the very heart of your being, to try to address that part of you that is not just a woman, not just a daughter, not just a nationality, not just a religion. And her eyes began to tear up, these beautiful brown eyes behind the veil. And then she said to me, I've just come to America. I've just arrived today. I've come from Nepal. I've had to leave my family. I was married 2 months ago, and my husband, returned to the States to be with his family. And I'm coming, and I'm so overwhelmed by, well, who am I? And I said, I'm a Christian teacher, and one of the things that Jesus often says after he teaches something, he says to his listeners, decide for yourselves what is true. So I said, listen to your parents, listen to your Hindu inheritance. Listen to this wise part of your inheritance, but always this is something you must ask. Who am I, and what is my real essence? And I said, her name is Pushpa, and I said, Pushpa, tomorrow morning when I do my morning meditation and prayer, I'm going to ask a blessing for you. And she looked right at me and said, and I bless you. And in that moment, I knew that I was being blessed by that part of her that bears no name, that part of her that is of the I am who I am.
So good. So good. Well, we could continue going through this book, and we're only through 3 pages. And I have a whole other book of yours here that I'm thinking we're going to have to do another one of these at some point. Either I'll come to Scotland or you'll come back through here.
Okay, you come
and
to
we'll
Scotland.
do one. Because your book, The Rebirthing of God, just so many people need to know about this book. So we'll do that at a later date.
Great. I look forward to it.
I'm so glad you came by the back house.
Thank you.
And hopefully next time I'll see you in Scotland. I'll have the same get-up with me here, the same equipment. We'll do it again.
Great.
You've really deeply inspired me and moved me. And I want everybody listening to meet you, to gather around your books and ideas, because I think you're really helping us see where the whole thing's headed. And that's a very, very, very meaningful thing.
Thank you, Rob. Many blessings to you.
All right, friends. That is John Phillip Newell. We're going to do more with him, right? You're feeling that, right? Grace and peace, everybody.